this is Jeff, and this is Photoshop Adjustments. So we're going to show you a couple different methodologies actually in this screencast tutorial for doing adjustments in Photoshop. The first one we're going to show you is destructive, meaning that it actually changes the data itself. The second one we're going to show you is a non-destructive way that you can do adjustments in Photoshop, and that's the newer way of doing things. But let's go old school first. So let's look at the destructive way of doing adjustments. So before I get started, the very first thing I'm going to do is I want to be able to have a big undo here. So I'm going to duplicate my layer. I'm going to go Layer, Duplicate Layer, and I'm just going to call this Lily. And I'm going then to turn off the layer underneath it and just leave this layer on. Okay, so let's go from there and actually go to Image, and we're going to go to Adjustments up here. The very first one I want to call your attention to is Brightness and Contrast. I work with this one quite a bit. It's one of the most basic. Usually just a little bit, as you can tell, goes a long way. I can make something way darker or way lighter really easy. So just having a nice touch with it, just a little bit, can make a big difference. And just going to turn the contrast up a little bit there. Same thing with it. We can go really over the top, but I'm just going to turn it up a little bit. There we go. So that's the first thing, is brightness and contrast. If we go up here to Image and we do adjustments again, one of the other ones that's a very common one to mess with is Hue and Saturation. So one of the things I can do here is I can actually kind of mess with the hue, and I can actually come into way funkadelic outside the range colors, or I can go the other way and get like a inverse sort of effect. But in this case, I'm just going to turn it just a little bit more to the blue values so the purple comes out a little bit. So I'm just going to turn it up just a little bit, and then I'm going to turn up the saturation a little bit so the purple maybe comes up a little bit more with that, and the greens with it. I can also do lightness and darkness in Hue and Saturation here, and there's really not a lot of need in this one to do that, so I'm just going to make the mildest of tweaks right there. And I can hit OK, and so that would be Hue and Saturation. There are a lot of other adjustments in here that are worth messing around with. For instance, we can invert. And I'm just going to go up here and I'm going to do Edit, and I'm going to undo that because we don't need it. I'm going to Image and Adjustments. We can do all sorts of different options, but one of the things that I like to really call people's attention to is the black and white. I can even adjust how my colors come through in this black and white by going through and changing each of these sliders. How the black and white maps that color can be altered, so that's a lot of fun. Auto's pretty good, but I'm going to hit Cancel here and go back out. So that just gives you an idea of some of these that you can mess with. But that's just the destructive method of working with this content. What would be a non-destructive method of working with this content, where we could maybe do each of these adjustments in isolation and have a better record of it? Okay, we talked about the old-fashioned way of doing adjustments, which was a destructive process. But how will we do it non-destructively? How do we keep all our original content and be able to make discrete changes in isolation in each of those same sorts of settings? Well, the way we would go about that would be adjustment layers. So let's set ourselves up to do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to unclick our Lily layer that we altered. And I'm actually going to be back with our background layer, and I'm actually going to do Layer, Duplicate Layer, and I'm going to call this one Lily 2. Alright, notice that there's a little bit of difference between it and the one we've altered. If I turn the top layer back on again and turn it off. So this is a complete duplicate of our original photo, and the one we're going to alter with adjustment layers. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to this palette called Adjustments up here, and I'm going to select this guy. That would be the same brightness and contrast dialog that we had before, pretty much, except for, notice that it's now linked to our layer. Come over here and just adjust that a little bit, just this a little bit, and that's pretty close to how I had it before. Likewise, I'm going to come over here and select Hue Saturation. Again, we end up with an adjustment layer. So I'm going to do Hue and Saturation here. I'm going to adjust the hue just a little bit to the blue. Turn the saturation up just a little so we get a little more green. And lightness, I think I'm actually going to go the other way. I'm going to turn it down just a bit. And this is one that we didn't do in the last selection, but it's also a tool that we could have used, but it's called curves, and so I'm going to select that as well. Curves let me alter the data of the image, and how it does that is that I have an upper and a lower quadrant here that I can mess with. And notice I can go way over the top, or I can go pull it way down to the bottom. I can also move this point of articulation. Usually what I like to do is I usually like to select something that really looks dynamic but doesn't change too much the nature of the photograph. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to reset this to auto, and that's kind of where it puts it by default. And I'm just going to pull this up just a bit in that direction, and I'm actually going to kind of give us a sun washed out feel. So I'm actually going to pull this down just a little bit so it looks like a hard shadow, and you get this kind of really almost hyper real dynamic from that. But what's kind of cool is that if I don't like that curve addition that I made, I can turn that layer off, and the changes that were with it disappear. I've done everything non-destructively. All my original data is still there. My original layer has not been altered. I can do the same thing with each of these. I can do different combinations of them and test things out. All that's being done non-destructively. I can turn each of these off and leave them in here just in case I wanted to mess with them in the future even. So that gives you an idea of how we can do adjustments in Photoshop. There's a lot more adjustments tools, and we could go through all of them, but if you're going to go that far, you really actually want to spend a lot more time with something like Lightroom and using it in unison with Photoshop to get the widest variety of effects. But this at least gets you started with that process.